It's Misha, Jerry Adams, and I have Brendan Brownlee, Rita O'Hare's husband, Don Doyle, long-standing friend and comrade and co-worker, and Donny Morrison, an even longer-standing friend and co-worker. So, and I see lots of friends of Rita here, Alan Carty to Rita and Shaw Fast, and she always loved to go to Achill Island, so Ballymena to Falshamore Road. And we're going to have a conversation more than anything else, so feel free, anybody in the audience who wants to contribute. I'm advised we don't need a roving mic, so just stick your hand up or stand up and say your piece. What else? Yeah, so I'm going to make just a few remarks just to set out what this discussion's about. And I want to welcome Kieran Quinn here, who is Sinn Féin's representative in North America, in the USA and in Canada, and Greg O'Loughlin is here from Friends of Sinn Féin, both long-standing friends of Rita also. And really we could take any sort of segment of Rita's long life of activism. You know, we could give this whole section over to her work in the USA, or as editor of Unpublished, or role as a leader with us, with the rest of us, on Grohi Naman, on women's issues, and particularly within the party, the setting up with other sisters, First Women's Committee. And there are other aspects of what she has done. But here we want to concentrate on unity. So this is about Rita O'Hare and unity. And it's entirely appropriate because up until her death, up until she couldn't work any longer, she was working with us on a small subcommittee on Irish unity. It's an Ardcoia subcommittee. And part of our function is to get the party active on the issue of unity. That's part of one of our objectives. So, if you maybe just hand over and let Rita speak for herself. This is a relatively long quote, but I think it sets out Rita's view of what unity might look like. So it's from Bodenstown in 1996. So I'm just going to read her words to you. She can speak for herself. The future we seek is for a transformation of Irish society. Constitutional change which places in the hands of the Irish people the sovereign power to determine our own future, free from outside interference. Reconciliation among Catholic, Protestant and dissenter, people of every religious belief and none, leading to unity in the common aim of Irish men and Irish women. We seek equality and respect. We seek employment. We seek a society which measures economic well-being in terms of proper education of our children, the provision of a free and comprehensive health service, jobs and facilities for our communities, freedom from the scourge of drug abuse and the crime it brings, and secure old age for senior citizens. And we seek a place for Ireland in a world which accords with our history of anti-colonial struggle. We seek the development of our natural resources and the fostering of industry with respect for the environment. And this is the vision which unites us as Republicans. And then a much shorter quote, and she's talking in this book about growing up and the influence, and she talks quite a lot about her father, Billy, and she ponders on the fact that Billy was brilliant in all these other struggles but didn't figure out how imperialism and colonialism fitted into his own neck of the woods. Billy was from a Protestant background. So she says, and the Brits weren't the only guilty imperial power. and you'll see why I chose this quote when I get to the last sentence. There were other colonizers, but the core of it was the same. Divide and conquer, subjugate the native people, take their land, their language, take away their identity, keep them in fear, inferior, and impotent. Otherwise they will rise up and take their country and they will fuck you out. So that's in the immortal words of Rita O'Hare. So what's the big riddle, what's the big conundrum for us as we have this short discussion? It's hard to harmonise as activists the national with the social and economic. It's hard to harmonise the national with the local. Sometimes we just tag Irish unity on to the end, or we don't mention it at all. Whereas obviously its primacy has to be recognised, and we won't get a real republic while the union exists. So we have to end the union, and we now have, and Rita was part of the effort to bring it about, a way of doing that under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. So we just go around the house, as I said, this would be a conversation. So once the panel, we're going to go to the panel first, and then anybody that wants, just join in. And you might want to talk about some other aspect of Rita, but just for the day that's in it, we would like to reflect and to tease out what Rita and what our vision is and how we get Irish unity.
I think Jerry put it very well when he read Rita's words about what a united Ireland would look like, or would have to look like, to suit us as Republicans. Rita was not a diplomat more than anything else. You get a different impression from this tough wee woman who looked people in the eye and told them what you thought. But she would also have be able to reason with unionism and say, look, this is what we're after here. What you have is artificial. It's not real. It's not worth anything. Come with us now, and we will make it something together. Now, a lot of unionism couldn't handle this. A lot of unionism would feel they have to go somewhere. People like Ireland said if there was a referendum and if a united Ireland was granted, she would leave. What can you say to that? Other than, are you taking your chickens with you? I mean, yes, people on the unionist side won't be able to handle it. And I know that. I have unionist friends, and I have some very funny friends also. But yes, if they feel they have to leave, then they have to leave. But those who want to stay and want to work it would have to stay and work it with the rest of us on this island. We as Republicans would have to work with other parties too. Even Micheál Martin, who every time he stands up has to attack Sinn Féin for some reason. People like that, I would find it very hard to sit in the same room as that man, but we will have to work with them. We have to work with Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Labour, everybody. Everybody will have to work together to get where we're going. The other problem with the referendum is, after the referendum, if we win it, that's the end. That's the end of all the talk. So what we'll have to do is get stuff done before that, not after it. And I think it's very important to realise that there's no going back to it. So Rita would caution about time. This generous sort of thing Republicans have given people more time. There is no time. Because it'll work against everything. Unions will start using it as a way of dragging things out and keeping the thing the same as it always was. And they're not doing themselves any favours in doing that either. Because demographics are not going to change. They're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. If they think they could drag it out for another 25 years after a referendum, if we win it, all they're going to do is get it weaker and weaker and weaker in that 25 years, and it's going to be harder for them to get away from it. And I think Rita would certainly say that would be a word of caution. If we do it time it, there'll have to be a time on it to put the bits together. 2 years, 3 years maybe, but no more than that. Thanks.
Now, Brendan, thank you, and we'll come back to you. John Doyle.
Thank you, Jerry. I might do a slight segue first. I'd say for all of us who knew Rita, if you were to say the first word that described Rita, we probably wouldn't say diplomat in relation to ourselves. But as Conor is sitting in front of me, I remember Stephen McLeay telling me the story. Conor and Stephen were over in the States. They're meeting, they're queuing, they're sitting outside an office of somebody senior in the administration. And then the next thing they hear Rita O'Hare's voice, and she's coming out of the meeting and she's sweetness and light to everybody. She nods to everyone, she knows everything about their lives. She turns to Conor, sees it to them. What the feck are you doing here? Probably summoned her up a little bit. I think if you wanted somebody who epitomises what Jerry talked about, I think it was Rita. She brought all of the politics together, and for her, and everything she did, her life of activism, every single strand of it was about Irish unity, was about freedom, and she didn't separate it out in any way. And I think for me, her huge strength was politics was personal to her. And that was the good, the bad, the harsh word, the good word, but in everything she did was personal to her. When I described her as talking about her last year, she was the most human of revolutionary. And that's where she had the impact, where she met somebody, whether it was, I went in to help her for 3 weeks and a lifetime passed, but she had the same relationships built in everything she did, whether as an IRA volunteer, the editor of the Fublocked. She went into the press office at a time of censorship, when you were fighting for any word to be heard, and then the embryonic stages of the peace process where there were press conferences with hundreds and hundreds of journalists, and she was as comfortable in one situation as next because her politics was true. She was authentic in absolutely everything she did, and I think that cut through then as she went to the negotiations in the early days, the trips to South Africa. She was as comfortable meeting with Nelson Mandela as the young ANC activists, and I think that politics took through, and probably more particularly in the United States. A huge ask for Rita to go out there and to kind of to continue our operation, and just the relationship she met, not just on Capitol Hill, not just in politics, but her work with the trade union movement, with Irish American people who stayed true to our project ever since because it was personal. And I think that's, I suppose, kind of what we'd all remember from her. And I think that's where she brought the Irish unity politics. And I think for two things that kind of strike me about it. She put a huge effort in. She could be the harshest critic of you, but she put a huge effort into mentoring young people, to giving her opinion, whether you wanted it or not. But probably this generation of Sinn Féin leaders, all in some way or other, were touched by her work, her comments, her feedback. She just took a huge amount of time in relation to all of that, and took pride in that. She was cross-generational, I suppose, in terms of what she did. And she was kind of very firm in that the politics, Irish unity, it's not that it's either or, it's not that it's after, it's at the core of our politics for being anti-colonial, anti-sectarian, in terms of social justice, equality. They all come from the same thing, and I think that's the importance of what she would say and what we need to do next. Don't separate them out. It's not the politics of change we're talking about. Irish unity is the heart of the politics of change, and it's all the other bits, I think, come around it. So that's the big, lots of stories you could say about Rita, but said that the most human of revolutionary, authentic to the core, made politics personal and stayed true to Irish republicanism and freedom for her entire life, literally down to her last breath. So.
Well, on the way down here this morning, we were listening to, I think it was News Talk on the radio, and there was two women contributors. One of them was really praising Sinn Féin and its contribution to this recent arts document. And the other woman, which I found interesting, says that her children go north, but she rarely goes north. And then she was asked about a referendum on Irish unity. And she says, it's far too soon. It's far too soon. This is like 25 years later, it's far too soon. And Rita, in her comments and in her work and in her writings, correctly pinpointed exactly what the problem is. And it's the fact that once the 26 counties was established, it became comfortable with its own borders. It tried to take on the mantle of being the Irish nation, when it's not. It's a partitionist free state. And Rita had that down to a T. And there's lots of writings in the book about analysing Fianna Fáil and the whole way that they put obstacle after. The closer we get to Irish unity, the more obstacles they put up. And you can even see that Michael Martin 2 years ago, he said that there'll be no border referendum on my watch. This is a so-called Fianna Fáil party of the Irish Republic. Such a nonsense. So it's up to us, the ordinary people, Republicans, true Republicans on this island, to bring about change. Well, Rita died last year at the age of 80. She became politicised when she was about 13 or 14, firstly through her father, Billy, Protestant from East Belfast, progressive, socialist, talking about their struggles. But then, when she analysed where she lived, she saw exactly what the problem was. Sectarianism. She analysed where sectarianism came from. It came from colonialism and imperialism. So she got her politics very, very young, and she spent the rest of her life. She was married at 17, and the rest of her life was involved in this struggle. So when people try to run our Republican argument down by saying, oh, you're not getting your border referendum, when's it going to happen? It'll happen when it happens, and it's going to happen. Because, I mean, whenever I became involved, I was told, this is like in 1971, it was going to be over by Christmas. Sorry. Here's the thing. When I grew up on the Falls Road, the Orange Order marched on the Falls Road. They came up Broadway. Red, white and blue bunting was put up. We weren't allowed. It was an offence to interfere with the flying of the Union Jack, and it was an offence to fly the Irish tricolour. And they came up and they played God Save the Queen outside, but it's now a Culterman. And we stood there because we were vanquished. We were completely vanquished. We felt on our own, deserted. But, to quote the proclamation, relying first and foremost on our own strength, we got off our knees. The state I live in today is not the state I grew up in. It has changed. It hasn't changed enough, but it will change. And we are on the right road, and we are very generous people. And by the way, when you talk about people leaving, both Adams and Morrison, I'm Scots Presbyterian, I'm going nowhere. So the point is, we are very generous people, and we will be reconciled. And there's interesting developments within the unionist communities. Many, many people reflecting on their ancestors in the 1788 period, the Presbyterians, who led republicanism, who created Irish republicanism, and they're looking back and examining, can they connect to that history, to that past, and to that culture? And can they move from there towards Irish unity? And it's happening. And we are on the right road here, and we're going to have a referendum, but we need to win it. And that's what we need to win it. We need to produce the political, social, economic arguments to demonstrate that it makes sense. And it does make sense, because the current situation in the north, the whole Stormont experiment, is a nightmare to work. The state itself is obviously a failed political entity, and yet our people are there trying to build bridges with the unionist community. So we have the right strategy, and 800 years later, I'm still very patient because I know it's not that far around the corner.
Right.
Peter Richard Oscar and Doris, they don't just touch your ear chair and so.
Bit noisy,
Sorry.
as long as you talk about it.
All right, so go to Margaret Downey. Right, so over to you. Anybody that wants to, I could pick on people.
Pick on Jim quick, Jim Gibney, would you?
Oh, no, everybody picks Right. Jim gets too emotional. Anybody else? Right, okay, so, go right, Cara.
Are we allowed to reminisce on Rita, on things that happened in Rita's life that influenced us?
Of course, you can reminisce, but remember you're being recorded.
Maybe I'm implicating myself a little bit, but
Don't implicate yourself.
I had the pleasure of coming across Rita in my student years in Dublin, the 69-73 period. And it's something that hasn't really been hit upon about the work she did in one particular area. and that related to the American Army draftees that were being handled, if you like, through Ireland at the time. Those that were actually active soldiers out in Vietnam at that period and would have leave and would have come in through wherever they were on leave to into Ireland. And Rita's involvement in that sphere, where there were young men that I met out in her house in Rock, because I had the pleasure of having a very old motor car at the time, which was used to bring them back and forth to Dublin docks. But she did an extraordinary amount of work over a period that I was involved there of about 9 or 10 months, where she literally, where these young soldiers that were 17, 18 years of age, they seemed boys, really, American soldiers. They came in, they were afraid of their lives about what they were planning to do, which was to desert the American Army. And she, through the likes of Mickey Mullen, who was very involved in the unions in Dublin, and other great characters, Frank Tusky, who became the leader of the Labour Party afterwards, he was involved in it. But there was a whole sphere of people at that stage, very quietly, being, if you like, being led by Rita, and she was just a young woman of 25 or 6 at the time. And she was basically organising shipping that was going out of Dublin port and going out of Dundalk, as I remember it. And these young lads were being put on those ships up to Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and onwards. A lot of them went to Canada thereafter, and there's quite an amount of those still living in Canada, those that are still alive. But I always admired her through the years, not only in her work for the Republican movement per se, but in relation to Sinn Féin afterwards, and the splendid work she did in Washington over the years. But that, to me, was one of her absolutely fantastic things at the beginning of her political life, to such an extent that when she took on the job in Washington afterwards, I wondered, was it ever discovered, you know, the work she had done, if you like, to undermine the American fiasco that Vietnam became, but it's my abiding memory of the woman. She was just fantastic, absolutely unbelievable.
I'll just say this about her. Rita was involved in an awful lot of campaigns, and in the book she couldn't cover those campaigns because time had run out, I think. So yes, I can appreciate what you're saying. I knew some of the things she was involved with in Dublin, and they were so varied. I mean, you couldn't start listening down even, you know, that way. Like, so I do appreciate what you said there, and I understand exactly where you're coming from in that.
I'm going to invite Emma McCardle here. Simply, she became a very close friend of Rita's. Wouldn't have known her as long as we did, but I always thought it was an interesting dynamic that Rita came into Emma's life and Emma came into Rita's life, both on this little UI committee that we were involved in. So maybe Emma, go around, Cara.
Or maybe Jerry. Yeah, I remember there was one time I was in Leinster House in your office, and Rita had come in to meet with you, and she was waiting to see you or whatever, and we were just chatting in the office, and it was, I can't even remember what the thing was, but something in American foreign policy there weren't happy with her, whatever, and I says something like, sure, we have to look after our own struggle first, or something like that. And I remember Rita looking at me, and I was like, I am fucked now. I'm in big trouble. And she goes, I love you. And I love you. Okay, but she really understood the need to be as neutral as possible, you know, with regards to American foreign policy, and to maintaining her own cohesion and all of that, and the purpose for which she was in America and working with the administrations there. So on a work level, yes, we worked very, very well together. I was very scared of her for a long time, but then after we warmed up to each other, we had a great friendship. And I remember in latter years, you know, when Rita was sick and in her illness and that, we would occasionally FaceTime, and it was during COVID and all of that, and my children ended up having a relationship with her because they were always hanging out of me, and she would write them letters and send them wee cards and that, and they would send her drawings and stuff that they had done. So, you know, like, we would chat about all sorts of things, work, yes, and, you know, just the difficulties that we encountered in life in a personal capacity and all of that as well. So she was a very good friend, and has Donna said as well, a very good mentor as well, and she really was somebody that you could look up to, and I was hugely fond of her, and you know, I remember the last time I saw her, and you know, we had coffee together down in her house and all of that, and she was in great form and had full of ideas about what we should do and where we should go, and giving out about who was doing this and who was doing that and who wasn't doing enough, and about her own ones as well, you know. So she never changed right up, you know. Every time I seen her, she was the same. You knew what you were getting. She was completely authentic, and yeah, she was definitely a role model, and somebody that I miss a lot.
All right. Go ahead, Carl. Go right.
Thanks, Frank. Dermot Coolman from the Mora Comfort Sinn Féin coming in Sandyford village in Dublin. Mora Comfort was a great lifelong Republican going back to the war of independence, and she lived in Sandyford, and actually Danny gave the funeral oration for her in 1982, but Rita was a great friend of Mora's, and one of the last public events that Rita probably attended in her life was the book launch of On Dangerous Ground, the memoirs of Mora Comfort, which was in Sandyford House in March 2022. And we had been on to Rita to invite her to come, but she'd been very ill the last few years. But such was her determination to be there to honour Mora Comfort, who she had such a fondness for. She came along, and Mary Lou launched the book, and Mary Lou won't mind me saying this, but the highlight of the night was Rita's speech to the crowd with her memoirs of Mora. And I'm delighted Danny and Brendan were there that night as well, because it really honoured two great Republican women, Mora Comfort but also Rita O'Hare, and it was about a year later that Rita finally passed away, but I only got to know her during the year 2022. Actually, the funny thing, she rang me the day after the book launch, and she was energised, I think, by that launch, and she said to me, because Sean Tracy, who would be our candidate in the general election, had liaised with her, but she said to me, and I quote, "Tell Sean Tracy, if my picture appears in any paper, I'll send
All right. I'm going to go to the back of the hall. I can't see everybody just because of the way the light's coming in, but particularly, if there are any women back there. I see Michelle Gilder, you go right, Cara.
Come on, Terry, I'm Margaret. I've known Rita for as long as I can remember, like a lot of people in this room. And I think one of the things that we sometimes didn't acknowledge or recognise probably was that Rita could be in Washington, she would be in and out of the offices of some of the most, at least they thought they were most important people in the world, but she couldn't come north. And I remember, I was talking to Caroline earlier about Siobhan O'Hanlon, another great friend and comrade, and the day Siobhan was buried, it was Easter week, Father Days, and we couldn't have a funeral mass because of the Easter, because it was Good Friday, and we were all together in bars in Belfast afterwards, and I was thinking, we're all here and Rita's not here, and I give her a wee call and said, look, Rita, I'm thinking about you and you're with us in spirit. And we ended up nearly having that every time. I remember when about Martin's wake and funeral, there were lots of times when Rita couldn't be there with the rest of us, and sometimes that was the hardest thing, to be so close but so far away, and when the rest of us were taking strength and comfort for one another, Rita was a wee bit, and I know Brendan, you were there, and that was the job that you and your family had to do, but a lot of us really missed her in those times when she should have been there. And you know, every now and again you're at something and you think, God, Rita would have loved it. And maybe it's in modelling, but there's a lady's not here today, so I sent her photographs of the crowd and told her that people had to be turned away because I knew she'd love to hear that as well. So I just think when people who would love to be here aren't here, it doesn't mean that we're not thinking about them and listening to.
At this point, Rita would say, well, what about unity? So, you know, the whole thing that I think all of us have learned is that you need a plan. And this has to be at the centre of it, because it won't happen by accident. And the forces that are against it will easily coalesce. And one of the things that Rita really adhered to was our strategic objectives. There was a need to stay united. The need to be cohesive. The need to work as a team. The need to set out objectives. The need to work to whatever little work program we can put together. So, you know, it's this conundrum of getting the whole democratic question into the centre of our activism, and we just need to be, you know, really vigilant about doing that in the upcoming period. So, without me putting words in people's mouths, and as I say, I can't see everyone, but just either put your hand up or just speak out. Go right.
My name is Dennis Power, and I would have known Rita from the very moment she came to Dublin. So my friendship goes back that long. I think we all know that. To take up your point, Rita would never be afraid to ask the question, what are other people afraid of and what can we do to satisfy their needs? We have not addressed those issues here, whatever about the north, but in the south. We need to take it on, full on. Whenever Micheál Martin puts his head above the parapet, we need somebody to bite him. When somebody comes up and says we can't afford it, we need somebody in finance to come back and say, what are you talking about? We don't take a proactive approach. I remember Rita from the get-go, first up, always doing the thing, organising this. And that's where we should take the lead from. That's it, guys.
No, Dennis, thank you. Anyone else? I'm going to call Kieran Quinn. Kieran, as I said earlier, is our rep in North America.
Stand up then.
I always do what I'm told by these acronyms up there. In terms of Rita, a couple of things, and I think the book is significant. I think it's what ties into the unity piece. Well, I was talking to Brendan earlier, and he said something that Rita would always say to us whenever we go on tours and someone was complaining about the weather, someone was complaining about not getting enough sleep, having to go through airports.
That's Richard McConnell.
It wasn't Richard McConnell, it was somebody else who was in this room. Rita can't get into America. Where she would say, you signed up, you're going to have to march. You're an activist, you have to be active. And I suppose in terms of the book tells the story of the power of activism. This is a woman who was left for dead by an Irish volunteer who was left for dead by the British Army. And then years later, she's in a meeting with a guy called Richie Neal, who's head of the Ways and Means Committee in Congress. And she's briefing Richie about Brexit. And she says, do you know what? The Brits think that they can get a trade deal with America and replace it with the European one. And Richie says, is that right? I'm the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. Any trade deal has to come through me. And there will be no trade deal unless the Good Friday Agreement is protected. That was a conversation with Rita O'Hare, with one member of Congress, and that becomes American foreign policy. And that forces the Brits back to negotiating with them. And bring it full circle, last week we launched a book in Washington, and Richie Neal spoke at that, and there was another Congress members. And what he said was, the next chapter of Irish-American relations has to be about the national question. It has to be about the national question. It has to be about the transitional potential of the Good Friday Agreement and unity referendums.
Now, Rita didn't come to that point, and Congress doesn't come to that point on their own. It was because of the work that people like Rita O'Hare has done, and made my job easier and opened so many doors for us. So that's the power of activism. That's the power of staying the course. That's the power of having authenticity, and as Dawn says, personal in your politics. And that's the next chapter. And if we're going to do anything to honour Rita O'Hare, it has to be about securing unity referendums and winning those referendums. That's the only way to honour our patriot dead, and I'll say this just in terms of summing up Rita's activism. When we were in Washington, it was summed up as this. Someone says Rita O'Hare was 2 parts can do and 1 part fuck you.
Right back to the back of the hall again. Anya, any dubs here? Right.
I have to say,
But you're not a dub, are you?
I am a dub. Not tell. No, I'm doing a master's at the moment in anthropology, and I'm looking at the decolonisation of our mind, body, and soul. And I guess just more of a comment or more of even a question. Danny, you mentioned about planning, I guess, for Irish unity, right? And we have to plan it now. But for a lot of people down the south, what I'm looking for is that they don't see themselves as even being colonised still, in a sense, in terms of their mind and their ideology. How do you tap into that? How do you tap into someone or even show someone that decolonisation still exists, even if you're not living in occupied territory, but it's still in even the language you speak. I'm back learning Irish at the moment, and I feel such a difference in now learning Irish. When I speak Irish, I feel like I speak it from a deeper part of myself, as opposed to when I just speak English now. So I can get that sense. So not to get spiritual about it, but it is a deeper soul level. So I guess just if you had any opinion on that, or to help me with my thesis, of course.
Listen to kneecap.
Yeah, of course.
Incidentally, Rita O'Hare loved kneecap. And Brendan and she had kneecap t-shirts before they became as popular.
It's Mary Louie.
Right, okay, Margaret. Danny, do you want to come back? I know it's a general question, but...
What you've just said is the biggest problem we face.
Yeah.
I think the mentality and the psyche of the people in 26 counties who've been encouraged to believe that they've got independence and freedom. To the extent now that it drives me crazy, and I hope no Sinn Féin TD ever says this, ever uses the word Ireland when they mean the 26 counties of the Republic of Ireland. You've got them in the Republic. They use it consistently, and they never used that term up until 1988. Once they got the amendment of Articles 2 and 3, they said to themselves, that's it, let's go, right? And they use Ireland and Northern Ireland, which really, really angers me. It brings me back to earlier days. Right? So that is a huge problem, and I think we have to challenge it. Challenge it through letters, challenge it through music, challenge it through the arts, challenge it through public meetings, and that's the way to do it. Confront them. Just keep confronting them. And we will win, because we are right.
Yes.
The other thing, just in my lifetime of activism, I think the vast majority of people that I meet who are involved in the community sector, who are involved in voluntary organisations, who are involved in the GAA, who are just trying to mind their families and look after people, they all broadly share our vision for a better Ireland. That they want a place which is decent and fair and equal and people are treated properly. And the vast majority of them want the British to leave Ireland, want partition to end. The vast, vast, vast majority of people, and even at the height of the conflict and even at the height of censorship and when things were very, very tight and very difficult, once you get out from under that and you were dealing with people in their own place, in their own kitchens or in the street, you found that that's been my experience. So it isn't all gloomy, obviously. Going back to what Liam Mallow said a long time ago during the treaty debates, that the problem with the treaty, he said, is if the treaty goes through, men will get into power, and men who get into power won't want to give that power up. And that's exactly what's with Micheál Martin and the rest of them, because they know. That's why they won't hold a citizens' assembly, because that's the genie out of the bottle. Once you're starting to formally deal with these issues and strip them back and discuss them and get expert advice on them and so on, they know that. And they know that there's going to be a realignment of politics across the island of Ireland. So everything that Danny has said with such passion is true, of course it is. But the plain people of Ireland have always been sound. The ordinary people have always been sound. Rita couldn't have survived just as a person for all the time she was in the south. There wasn't people, and she was. She had it tough. When I met her in the 70s, when it was tough what she was going through at that time. So ordinary people, neighbours, other Republicans minded her, looked after her kids. So that's our focus be on the people, and on Bobby Sands was very clear in this. The day will come when the people of Ireland will have the thirst for freedom, I'm paraphrasing them, in their hearts, and that's when we will see the rising of the moon. And commonly, using more political language, talked about the reconquest of Ireland. So that's what we are about. We're about the reconquest of Ireland in order to have the very, very best society that we can have. Anyway, I've said enough. So anybody want to pop in again? Right there, somebody, go right. You need to just start your mouth, just shout out.
Thank you. I think just need to remind you that there are many bodies in the civil service, north and south of this island working together, like in heritage, in waterways. It's already happening. It's not something, we just need to move on from there and extend it to other institutions. But it is already, it is possible, it's working to a small degree now. We can just expand on that. We should let people down south know that this actually is possible. People in the north of this island and the south of this island together in the same body to work out for the whole of the island what's best.
Okay, got it. Did you all hear like that? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, look, if we're talking about Irish unity, and that's what the theme is today, it's very important that we keep that as our focus, because I think we kind of get lost sometimes, I suppose, and with two different, with a partitionist mindset, especially with the general elections going to be coming up. And we got feedback after the local elections as what was the big thing that stood out and people were saying about us at grassroots is that we didn't come across as an opposition party. How are we different from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael? Well, number one is Irish unity. We're a 32-county party. I think we forget to tell people that at the doorsteps when they ask us. Why did we join Sinn Féin in the first place? I didn't join for a better healthcare system. I joined for United Ireland. That was number one. Okay, obviously, we do want to see better Ireland, but instead of saying that we're going to solve the problems of the 26 counties in our healthcare system, we want an all-Ireland healthcare system. We want an all-Ireland transport system, like we have with our tourism, as the lady said at the back. And just as a gentleman from Dublin, I 100% agree with him there about Micheál Martin. This man is raising his head against us the whole time, and we let him have it. We haven't actually counteracted him. For example, 2 years ago, Micheál Martin tried to, two of his, Eamon O'Queeve and Mark Daly from Kinmare, tried to run a candidate up in Cavan and Monaghan there. Micheál Martin basically sacked them for doing it when they were trying to run a candidate in the 6 counties. Now, he calls himself a Republican. He was never called out for that, and we should be calling him out for things like that. Every time he raises it against us, we should disprove Fianna Fáil, a complete myth that they're a Republican party. They're the party, and Fine Gael, who have for the last 80 years have welcomed the captains of Tyrone and Armagh and Derry up to the steps of Croke Park and basically told them to go back across the border with the cup after. That's the way they treated them. We're not like that in Sinn Féin. That's how we're different, and we should tell people that at the doorstep.
I'm going to take two more. I'm just giving notice to the panel. I'm going to take 2, maybe 3 more from the audience, and then we're going to come back to the panel, and then I'll say a word or two just to conclude. So I can't see you, just stand up and speak. Frank Conley, do you want to say anything? No, I'll put you on the spot. And I'd like to also signal out Greg O'Loughlin who is the nicest American. So, there's Greg Go.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Greg O'Loughlin. I look after Friends of Sinn Féin in the United States with Kira. And previous to that, I worked with Rita in the Washington office from 1997 to 2003. I learned so much from Rita, as Dawn mentioned, her mentorship in my work and who I am. And she, I would make mistakes in my writing, and she'd call me into her office and say, "Do you not know this, or are you winding me up?" I don't know it. And she said, "Well, I'll teach you one time, and if you make the mistake again, we're going to have a problem." And so that's how I learned how to write and to edit and to proofread and to get the job done. Well, she became a close personal friend to me and my family. And it's just incredible the impact she has had. When we go into the halls of Congress, into the White House, into State Department meetings, everyone knows Rita, and the impact she had across the country is immeasurable. And I'm grateful to be part of today.
Mark Frank.
Yeah, I'm doing it. I wasn't planning, but I would like to recall a couple of things. Firstly, I, as a journalist over many years, dealt with Rita and with John, obviously, in the press office. And if I got things right, Rita would always be kind enough to remark on that. But if I got things wrong, or if she was indiscreet with anything, I also felt the sharp edge of her tongue, like many others. But most recently, my encounter with Rita was in the preparation for a book I did on the United Nations, the case for integrating Ireland. And I had quite a lot of discussions. In fact, I just reminded myself of the tapes of those conversations. Something that Brendan said struck me, because in every conversation, Rita's point was, we cannot wait to convince unionism before we have a referendum on unity. Every time we discussed it was the fact that, of course they're going to delay. They're going to procrastinate. They're going to use every excuse to obstruct. And as the Irish government for many, many years, with the exception perhaps recently of Labour Actor, has consistently answered the question about unity and a referendum and what's the likelihood. Well, we still have to convince 1 million Protestants, remember, the old Owen Harris line. Well, actually, there aren't 1 million Protestants going to vote against the United Ireland. That's another myth. But the only point I'd say is that Brendan is right. Rita said constantly, we can't wait for people to be convinced. If they're never going to be convinced, all you're doing is giving them an excuse for delay. All the more reason why a date for referendum should be set. Set very, very soon.
I'm just giving, if anybody, Conor Murphy coming in, and then I have Rose Conway Wells just to finish, unless somebody wants a very short bit that hasn't spoken. Okay, so over to you, Conor, and then Rose.
Thank you. The work that Rita did in the States is very well documented, and her ability to, I suppose, put the struggle ahead of what she obviously thought of American foreign policy and things like that was a challenge, but one that she met because of her dedication to that. But the people, I always found when travelling with her and talking to her out there, the people who grinded her gears most out there were actually the Irish government officials. Because the entire diplomatic mission of the Irish Free State was to dissuade the American administration, American politics, or the Irish diaspora out there from being involved in the struggle for change in Ireland. And probably still is to this day. So those were the people, and that's when people talk about Micheál Martin, there are thousands of them out there trying to make sure that people don't engage with the project for change in Ireland. And I remember one time when I was out there, the Northern Ireland Bureau was based out there as well. She hadn't a lot of time for them either, or the Brits, but she expected of the Brits, so it didn't, I suppose, irk her as much as Irish people out there doing that work. But there was a guy who was briefly in the Northern Ireland Bureau out there. I met him, I knew him from work back in Belfast, and I thought he was an okay fella. So I persuaded Rita, much against her better judgment, for the three of us to go out to dinner one night. And so she was very sceptical, because the NIO Bureau, or it wasn't the NIO, it was actually the Executives Bureau out there. So he was a really nice guy with good conversation, and she found him okay, and she kind of gradually thawed a little bit, to the point at the end of the night when we were going to leave, she said to him, "Do you know you're not the worst bastard?" That for me was a huge compliment. But just the last wee anecdote, as Jerry will know, we travelled, and even up in last week, I travelled to the States. We always get pulled in pre-clearance, taken in the back for a bit of questioning. It's no matter whether you're a minister or whatever you are. So Rita would always be patiently waiting on you on the other side to come back out to make sure you get through okay as we were travelling together. So the guys took me up, the American immigration office took me up to the desk, and the guy says to me, "Are you travelling with Margarita?" I says, "Who?" And he says, "Margarita O'Hare." I said, "Oh yeah." So I'm out, and she's standing with me, and I looked at her and I says, "Margarita?" And she says, "Don't say a fucking word."
Well, she hated being called Margarita, but the point that was made there, the Irish government used to follow us around America, and you can rest assured the Irish government still follow us, Mary Lou or Conor or Michelle, around trying to undo the good work that we're doing with the diaspora. Go ahead, Rose. Gormagat.
Can you hear me with this? Yeah. Okay. Well, firstly, I would just say with Rita. Rita was the one person, probably, and Phil McFadden, that always called me by my full name, Mary Rose. She never called me anything else. But I think it's really good to have this discussion here again, and I take on what you were saying around being personal. And Irish unity has to be personal to each and every one of us. Now, I would take heart in what's been done in the work. Sometimes we don't realise ourselves in all the work that's been done, and I'll just give you an instance of it with Aberdeen University and UCD, for instance, and the work they are doing and the constitutional change. So what that translates into is that women's groups, I come from probably the most rural area in Ireland, in Belmullet and Erris, women's groups will be sitting down over the next number of months discussing what kind of an Ireland they want and discussing constitutional change across the board. We need to have that in every county. It can be facilitated, there's funding for it there. So every councillor, if there are councillors here today, we have to, absolutely we know what the Irish government needs to do. It's well documented. But I don't think anyone, I'm delighted to see that the Ardèche is, based on Irish unity front and centre. None of us should go from here, what can I do, what can I do? And the first thing you can do, I suppose, with the elections coming up is, we know that we're not going to move this project to where it needs to be moved without Mary Lou MacDonald being Taoiseach. So we have to do that. Now we have weeks to be able to do that. And I know what Rita would want us to do to bring that over the line for us. And then things will happen very quickly. So I suppose I just want to bring it back to that. There's a lot being done, but what can I do? What can I do? And that should be the question for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. I'm going to put this question to Brendan, Dawn and Danny. So what can I do? We're all here. We've heard all the stories. And what can I do? What would Rita expect us to do?
Well, at the moment there's a very good social media campaign. Let's talk about Palestine. And I think what we should be doing is let's talk about a united Ireland and do it every day, send stuff out there, just keep to everybody, to all our friends. Pick 7 friends each, send them this stuff every day. If everybody starts doing that and they start doing that, then we get a message. We'll get the feeling across that there's a lot of people here interested in this. It has to be done. I think a simple thing like that is all we can do.
Good idea, well done. Right, Dawn. Thanks, Brendan.
Can I give a slightly more optimistic tone than Danny's first before what can I do? 2 seconds on free stages, in which Rita had very strong opinions about. Rita hated the term free state. She was not blind to the free state mentality of people holding on to power in the 26 counties, but she hated the phrase because she didn't think it represented the vast majority of people who live in what some would refer to as the free state. So I think just there's something happening out there, so it's not just the policy stuff, but if you go back to 2016 and the lead into it, the Irish government did a thing, remember Jerry, in the GPO, it was like a board fáilte thing. It didn't actually mention 1916, the 1916 leaders. They were just torn apart on it and had to change it to the point where they now do the Easter commemoration at the GPO each year. Small but significant. So the things in primary schools that year where the proclamation, the flag were brought to every school. You have a generation of kids, unbeknowingly probably to what they allowed happen at the time, who are now following Kneecap and the Wolf Tones, and there was 50,000 in that electric picnic. There's a defiance and there's something changing out there, and sometimes change can happen fast. So you need all the policy and all the politics ready to go for but the moment is kind of happening, and we have to, I think, just really kind of deepen the politics around all of that. And Rhys thinks, what can I do? And it's, for Rita was, who do I need to get to? Who do I need to convince? Who do I need to bring on board? And what's the plan to get there? If it's not a written down plan, it doesn't exist. Rose is right, it is the elections, but it's far, far bigger than that. So what does everybody do in encouraging young people, encouraging art, and encouraging the conversation to happen everywhere? Rita hated navel gazing, whingers, people giving out. What can I do? So look to yourself first and what you bring to the table to make this happen.
Already done. Do your best not to be revoked by
I'm
this,
going to be sorry I said that.
You know how nice it must feel when you just refer to Londonderry? And that's why I use the term Free State. Because I know that it goes to the heart of the problem, and some of these people, they have to deny that they're Free Staters. But I accept what you're saying about Rita's, the pejorative way that people take it. I think if you look at Rita's life, she provides a perfect example of what we need to do. You know, at 80 years of age, she was still a revolutionary, she was still a Republican, she was working on the book until her last breath. So there is an example there, and also of her defence of all of the, I mean, I think there's about 2 people, maybe 3 people, that the Brits have refused to relent on in terms of the on the runs. Rita and Owen Karen were among that group of people. So even at 80, they were bitter and resentful of the life that she had led, because she put them in a corner. She reminded the Brits about what the issue was in Ireland, their interference in our affairs, and her total opposition, lifelong opposition to that.
All right, so there's another book event in the Cobblestone of somebody, I don't know if Micheál McDonagh and Shaw.
No.
And will data again you? Does anybody know the date of that? Well, you check out anyway with the Dublin Sinn Féin website. There'll be another book event in the Cobblestones in the next month, so just check that out. I should have had that information for you.
I think it's the 8th or 12th of October.
Right, okay.
You can be at the pub both nights.
Now, just
10th of October.
10th of October. Margaret, you're going to be there.
3 days.
Seamus. Morning, far. Okay, so I'm just going to finish this week with a round of Cougar meetings on Zoom, and we did them over the last number of weeks. And here's the thing, with one exception, no area has a plan. Right now, people are active, people are doing things, some people are really, really advanced, and there is activism, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the party isn't active in this issue, we are. But not one area had a plan. So, that's what you do. Now, by area I mean a common or a code of conduct or that sort of level within the party. So there's what do we do? Dawn mentioned this. Get a plan. It could be a very, very simple thing. It could be Brendan's little idea of just getting in touch with a small number of people. It could be putting a stall up outside a shopping centre on a Saturday. It could be any number of small ideas. They don't need to be big ideas. And then we can knit all of that together and we can get a bit of cohesion and a bit of coherency around it. So that's what I would ask you to do, and that's the purpose of us doing these Cougar meetings, is to say to the local areas, please go in and discuss this. I often say at meetings that any question which we have about struggle, the answer will be in the room. There's enough wisdom, intelligence, experience in this room to deal with any problem that we have in relation to how to pursue struggle. But we won't get the answer to the question unless the question is put. And we won't get the answer unless the discussion is had. So don't contain this to this meeting today where we discuss all of these matters. Please bring it back out to whatever structure you're involved in. My own notional idea is that struggle is a continuum. This struggle will go on forever. When many of us are going, society will still always need to be developed and to be produced so that there can be the most keep a sense of people empowerment and people having control of their own destiny and people being treated as equals. So that all of us bend ourselves to that. And we all only have to do a little bit. You know, the sum total of us all doing a little bit means that some people don't have to do as much as they've had to do. So I would just leave those thoughts with you. I'm going to ask Richard McCauley to have the last words here. And he may want to tell us just of his last conversation with Rita O'Hare. And then remember, the book's here. It's a not-for-profit project, and I'm sure if you were able to, I don't want to walk Donny into this at his age, but I'm sure if you were able to organise, you know, a decent event to promulgate this book, that Donny would try and facilitate that. Okay, Richard, go right.
Thank you, Jerry. When I got out of Long Cash, I was put into the full block to work, and Rita was the voice at the other end of the phone, because she couldn't come north and most of us didn't really travel south. So, as others have said, she was a mentor. So her mentoring me meant that, particularly on a Wednesday evening, when we were hitting the deadline, I would end up with maybe 2 or 3 hours of a verbal contest with Rita on the phone over articles that hadn't been finished or weren't ready in time or whatever was going on. And Dawn has just reminded me that Rita's favourite description for me on the phone was, "You're a dickhead." And if it was said once, it was said half a dozen times or more in the course of the evening. And then the measure of the woman was that the next day we'd be on the phone again talking about the following week, and it was as if nothing had happened the night before. She was sweet and light and roses. It was, and then the following week we were back to it again. So that was that. And then over the years, particularly with Jerry when travelling the States, Rita was very much a big part of what we were doing, and she had a real insight into American policy that most of us hadn't a baldy notion about, and we learned a lot from all of that. But just to finish, on just a few days before Rita died, Jerry and I visited her in her house. So the question has been asked, what can I do? Well, Rita answered that for me. I went into her, I was heading out, and she just looked at me, and she raised her fist, she shook it, and she said, "Win." That was it, win. So what can we do? We win.
Thanks everyone. Thanks to the panel, thanks for Mick O'Brien for all his help, thanks for Eva, thanks for Grace, and remember there's books in the corridor waiting for you.